The 1980s gave reggae its biggest voice, but it also brought its darkest storms. 10 songs shook the world. They spoke about war. They spoke about pain. They spoke about truth no one wanted to hear. Some songs got banned. Some got burned. Some singers lost everything for one verse. You think you know reggae's golden age, but you don't know the price some artists paid for it. These are not just songs. They are warnings. They are wounds. They are pieces of history that governments tried to silence. Stay with us. By the end, you will hear reggae in a whole new way. This is the story of the 10 most controversial reggae songs of the 1980s. Number 10. Yellowman. Nobody move. Nobody get hurt.
Nobody move. Nobody get hurt. Nobody move. Nobody get hurt.
Close your eyes and picture a hot Kingston night. The zinc fences are shaking. The bass is so heavy it moves through your shoes and up into your chest before the words even reach your ears. Sweat drips down concrete walls.
Nobody move, nobody get hurt. Nobody move, nobody get hurt.
People are pressed close together, waiting for the next tune to drop. This is not soft, gentle music. This is raw dancehall power, loud and proud and full of swagger. This song came out in the early 1980s, right in the middle of a huge shift happening in Jamaican music.
He wanted to join the army. I ain't gonna do it, officer.
Roots reggae had ruled the 70s, with its slow, spiritual, message-heavy sound. But now a new generation of young DJs was taking over the microphone, and they wanted something faster, bolder, and more playful. This track became one of the anthems of that new wave.
No fucking way, ain't gonna do it. Turn out to that pocket.
It was built for the sound system, made to be shouted back by a crowd, made to win a dance. The lyrics themselves are clever and confident, full of wordplay and street-smart humor. They were not trying to preach. They were trying to entertain, to hype a room, to make people move.
I'm searching for a cool automatic. I'm searching in the narcotic.
That alone made it different from almost everything reggae fans had grown used to hearing. It became a massive sound system favorite almost overnight, spinning in dances all across Jamaica and quickly crossing over into the UK reggae scene, where fans could not get enough of this exciting new dancehall flavor.
He said, what is the number? I didn't answer. What is the number? I still know.
It even helped open the door for Yellowman to become one of the very first dancehall DJs ever signed to a major American record label. Something almost nobody thought possible for a Jamaican artist working in this raw, unpolished style at the time.
What is the number, boy? Your ass officer.
Here is a detail that often gets left out. Yellowman grew up facing real hardship and real prejudice because of his appearance, something he had to overcome just to be taken seriously as an artist. By the time this song hit the dances, he had already fought his way from the margins straight into the center of Jamaican pop culture. That journey alone makes the song hit differently once you know the story behind the voice. Not everyone welcomed this new sound with open arms. Roots reggae purists, the older generation of fans and musicians, said this style was disrespecting everything reggae had built. They said it was too loud, too flashy, too focused on party life instead of serious messages about struggle and spirit.
Everybody sing, nobody move.
Some radio programmers quietly limited how much dancehall they played, worried it would damage reggae's more respected, conscious image overseas. That tension between roots reggae and dancehall never fully went away. It still shapes arguments among reggae fans today, decades later.
Nobody move. Nobody move. Well, give it.
And because history books and documentaries so often focus only on the roots and Rastafari side of the story, songs like this one, and the artists who built dancehall from nothing, often get pushed into a small footnote instead of getting the full chapter they deserve.
To me one time. Give it to me 2 times. Give it to me.
If a song this important, this influential, this alive with energy almost got erased from the official reggae story, imagine how many more powerful moments in this music we still do not fully know. Number 9. Musical Youth, Pass the Dutchie. Now picture something completely different. A living room in London, 1982. The television glows in the corner. A family sits together after dinner, half watching, half doing other things, the way families do. Then 5 young boys appear on the screen, barely teenagers, some still with baby faces, singing with bright, sweet voices on one of the biggest music shows on British television. Parents smile, children dance along. Nobody in that room thinks they are watching anything controversial at all. But underneath that innocent moment was a much more complicated story. This song was built from an older reggae tune, one that openly talked about passing a couchie, a word tied directly to marijuana and the culture surrounding it. To make the song safe for daytime radio and family television, the label carefully reworked the lyrics, changing that one word to Dutchie, which simply means a cooking pot used for making food. On the surface, it became a song about sharing a meal. Underneath, everyone in reggae culture quietly understood exactly where it came from. The song exploded far beyond anyone's expectations. It shot to number 1 on the charts in the United Kingdom. It crossed the ocean into the United States. It reached deep into parts of Africa and Europe that had barely heard reggae music before. For millions of listeners around the world, this cheerful, catchy song sung by children was their very first real introduction to reggae as a genre at all. Here is the detail that surprises people most. The boys recording this song were so young that some of them barely understood the original meaning hiding underneath the words they were singing. To them, it was simply a fun song about sharing something good with friends. They had no idea they were standing at the center of a much bigger cultural conversation. That innocence is exactly why the song became controversial among older, more serious reggae fans. Many felt uncomfortable watching a genre built on real struggle, spirituality, and rebellion get softened, sweetened, and repackaged for mainstream pop radio, sung by children who did not even fully grasp what they were singing about. They worried reggae was losing its identity in exchange for chart success. Others disagreed completely, arguing that this song opened doors for reggae that had never existed before, introducing an entire generation of new fans who might never have discovered the genre otherwise. Because history remembers this song mostly as a cute, catchy pop hit rather than a piece of serious reggae history, its complicated, layered story rarely gets told in full. Most people who grew up singing along on the playground never learned where those words truly came from. If you are enjoying this journey so far, go ahead and smash that like button right now. It genuinely helps this channel keep telling these hidden stories that so many people never got to hear. Was this song a bridge that helped reggae reach the whole world, or was it reggae quietly losing a piece of its own voice just to please the charts? Even now, longtime fans still do not fully agree on the answer.
All right, C-Trends fam, let's keep it real. We're pouring our hearts into bringing you the best celebrity news and music deep dives. What? Check it. A massive 98% of you aren't subscribed yet. Subscribing is how you can truly support us, helping us grow and create even better content. If you're vibing with what we do, take a sec to hit that subscribe button. It's free and makes a huge difference. Plus, ring that notification bell so you never miss out. Let's flip that 98% and build this C-Trends family together. Your support is everything.
Every story you see here takes hours of digging, piecing together history, and bringing forgotten moments back to life. If you'd like to support that work, you can become a channel member. It's just the cost of a cup of coffee, but it helps us keep these stories alive, and for that, we're grateful. Number 8. Black Uhuru, Sinsemilla. The mood shifts now, growing thicker, heavier, almost like smoke slowly filling a quiet room. This is not a song built for pop radio. This is deep roots reggae, slow and hypnotic. The kind of music meant for late nights, dim lighting, and long, quiet thoughts. Released in 1980, this track leaned fully and openly into the ganja culture that had always been deeply connected to Rastafari spiritual life. Where many earlier reggae songs only hinted at the subject through careful, coded language, this one spoke about it directly, treating the plant not as something shameful, but as something almost sacred, something worthy of respect and celebration. The production behind the song was rich, spacious, and deeply atmospheric, built around a rhythm section so precise and powerful that it became legendary among reggae musicians and producers for years afterward. Every bass note seemed to hang in the air a little longer than it should. Every drum hit landed with a kind of patient, deliberate weight. The song quickly became a favorite among sound systems that leaned toward the spiritual, meditative side of reggae. The crowds who came not just to dance, but to feel something deeper. It helped cement Black Uhuru's growing reputation as one of the most respected roots reggae groups of their entire generation. A reputation that would eventually carry them toward major international recognition and awards few Jamaican groups had received before them. Here is something many casual fans never realized. Because the song praised marijuana so openly, at a time when drug laws across many countries were strict and aggressively enforced, several radio stations, both inside Jamaica and overseas, quietly chose to avoid playing it at all. There was no dramatic public announcement, no official ban with headlines attached. It simply disappeared from many playlists without explanation. A quiet, almost invisible kind of censorship that left the song thriving underground while staying nearly silent on the airwaves. That quiet, unofficial ban is exactly why this song faded from mainstream memory over time. Without steady radio support, it never reached the massive audience many believe it deserved. Yet among serious roots reggae collectors and longtime sound system followers, it remained, and still remains, an absolute untouchable classic. A song this respected in the underground, yet almost invisible to the wider world outside it. That gap alone tells you just how much of reggae's true history stayed hidden in the shadows, protected and treasured only by the people who already knew where to look. Number 7. Judy Mowatt, Black Woman.
Black woman, black woman, like me up struggled.
Now we slow everything down, because this next story carries a very different kind of weight. Picture a woman standing alone at a microphone, surrounded almost entirely by men. Throughout the 1970s and into the 80s, the reggae industry was run almost completely by male artists, male producers, and male label owners. Women were expected to sing backup, to smile, to stay quietly in the background while the men took the spotlight. This song, the title track from her powerful album released in 1980, refused to follow that unwritten rule. It spoke directly and boldly about strength, dignity, identity, and pride for Black women. At a time when that kind of message was almost never placed front and center in reggae music. The lyrics did not ask permission to exist. They simply stated the truth as this artist saw it. Calm, proud, and unshaken. The album went on to earn serious critical praise and even significant award recognition, an outcome that was extraordinarily rare for a female-led reggae project during that era. It quietly opened doors across the industry, even if those doors opened slowly. And even if many of the people walking through them afterward received far more credit and attention than the woman who first pushed them open. Here is a detail that so often gets left out of the wider reggae story. Judy Mowatt had already spent years singing background vocals for one of the most famous reggae acts the world has ever known, standing just out of the spotlight for most of her career. Because of that, many casual listeners barely knew her as a serious lead artist in her own right, until this album finally forced people to pay attention. Some corners of the industry pushed back quietly against her success. Visibly uncomfortable with a woman speaking so directly and so confidently about identity, struggle, and self-worth inside a genre so thoroughly built around male voices and male perspectives. Because of that quiet resistance, and because the wider industry rarely promoted female-led reggae with the same energy and investment given to male artists, this album never received the massive global spotlight many believe it truly deserved. A woman broke through walls that most people at the time did not even notice were standing there in the first place. That kind of quiet courage deserves to be remembered clearly, not buried under decades of silence. Number 6. Gregory Isaacs, Night Nurse. Picture a smoky, late-night radio show, the kind where the host speaks low and slow between songs, letting the silence breathe before the next track begins. This song glides into that silence like something poured rather than played, smooth as warm oil, and it immediately wraps itself around the entire room. It quickly became one of the defining lovers' rock songs of the entire decade, a song that seemed to exist outside of time itself. Released in 1982, the song sounds, on the surface, like a tender, aching love song. Delivered in that famously silky, unforgettable voice that earned this artist the nickname the Cool Ruler. But over time, listeners and critics began quietly whispering about a second, hidden meaning underneath the romance. Many believed the lyrics were not only about love, but also about addiction, and about a desperate need for relief, a subtle, careful nod toward personal struggles that were slowly becoming public knowledge at the time. The song became a massive hit across the entire UK reggae scene and far beyond it, later sampled, referenced, and reinterpreted by artists working in completely different genres for decades afterward, long after the original recording session had faded into music history. Here is the twist that many fans still do not fully know. Because the lyrics were written with such careful, deliberate vagueness, nobody could ever fully prove which meaning was the true one: tender romance or something far darker hiding just beneath the surface. That unresolved mystery only made the song more powerful, more haunting, more impossible to forget once you noticed it. Because the real story behind the song was so personal and so painful, some fans, and even close friends of the artist, avoided discussing the deeper meaning publicly for years afterward. Choosing instead to simply let the song exist as a beautiful, uncomplicated love song. That long silence is a large part of why the deeper, more difficult meaning behind this song rarely gets discussed openly, even now. A love song that might have really been a quiet cry for help. Reggae has always found ways to carry real pain wrapped inside real beauty, and this song proves that truth better than almost any other from its entire era. Number 5. Sister Nancy Bam Bam. We are halfway through this list now. Which song has hit you the hardest so far tonight? Type it in the comments below, because I genuinely want to know which one is staying with you. This next story is about power, and about being denied the reward that power should have earned. Picture a young woman stepping up to a microphone inside a scene almost completely dominated by men. She was still a teenager at the time. Her older brother was already a respected, established artist in his own right, but she was about to carve out her own place in music history, entirely on her own terms. Recorded in 1982, the song rides on a bouncing, almost unstoppable rhythm that grabs you within the first few seconds and simply refuses to let go. The lyrics are confident, playful, and self-assured. a young woman calmly declaring her place inside a tough, competitive, male-dominated industry, without apology and without hesitation. Decades later, this track exploded far beyond the boundaries of reggae entirely. It got sampled inside major hip-hop records. It was licensed for huge international advertising campaigns. It played inside massive stadiums during some of the biggest sporting events on the planet. It quietly became one of the single most recognized reggae rhythms in the entire world, heard by hundreds of millions of people who likely never even knew its true origin. Here is the part that turns this story into real, undeniable controversy. For many years, Sister Nancy reportedly did not receive proper payment or proper credit for a song that was earning enormous sums of money for other people through samples, licensing deals, and commercial use around the globe. According to her own accounts shared later in interviews, she discovered her own decades-old song being used commercially by stumbling across it online. Not because any company or label ever reached out to inform her directly. She eventually fought hard to reclaim both her rights and her long overdue royalties. And her story became a powerful, widely cited example that other reggae artists later pointed to when discussing exactly how the music industry has historically failed to properly protect Jamaican musicians and their work. A song famous absolutely everywhere, yet its own creator was nearly erased entirely from its story for decades. That stands as one of the most important, most necessary warnings inside the entire history of reggae music. Number 4. Max Romeo, Fire Fee the Vatican.
Fire fee the Vatican. Look at that. Blood.
Now the mood turns sharp, urgent, and unmistakably political. Picture a small, modest radio station somewhere in the Caribbean. A nervous program director standing there holding a record in his hands, quietly deciding whether he actually dares to play it on the air at all.
Who say? Revelation say.
Released in 1980, this track did something very few reggae songs at the time were bold enough to attempt. It directly and openly criticized powerful religious institutions.
Who say? So the prophet say. And what he say?
Blending deep Rastafari spiritual belief with sharp, pointed social commentary. Aimed squarely at systems of power the artist felt had failed ordinary struggling people for generations.
Fire feel the Vatican. Look at that. Blood feel the Pope man.
The lyrics were fiery, both literally and figuratively, aimed like a spotlight at authority itself.
Who say? Revelation say. Who say?
Max Romeo had already built a reputation for controversial material earlier in his career, but this particular track pushed even further into serious political territory.
What the prophet say. Oh yeah. Ching.
Arriving right in the middle of a decade when reggae was rapidly becoming a genuine global voice for the poor, the overlooked, and the powerless.
In society.
Here is a detail that tends to surprise people the first time they hear it. According to several accounts from the period, certain pressings of this song reportedly struggled to secure proper distribution in specific markets.
A serious thing, fighting against humanity.
Because record stores and radio stations grew nervous about the subject matter, fearing real backlash from religious communities and more conservative listeners who might have been offended by such a direct challenge to established authority.
No Chester, rainbows and dark.
Because of that quiet, widespread hesitation, the song never reached the massive audience it likely deserved. It remained a treasured favorite among serious roots reggae collectors and devoted longtime fans. But casual listeners today rarely ever come across it at all.
In society, a serious.
A song too bold for its own era, silenced not through one single dramatic ban, but through quiet fear spreading slowly across an entire industry, one nervous decision at a time. Number 3. Rita Marley, One Draw. This next story is deeply personal, and it deserves to be told with real care. Picture a woman who had already spent years standing quietly beside one of the most famous musicians the entire world has ever known. Finally stepping fully into her own spotlight, on her own terms, with her own voice. Released in 1981, this song openly and joyfully celebrated marijuana, delivered in a light, playful, almost teasing tone that instantly made it a favorite at parties, gatherings, and relaxed evenings among friends. It felt warm, easy, and full of good vibes from the very first note. But Jamaica in the early 1980s still enforced strict drug laws, and openly pro-ganja songs made many authorities visibly uncomfortable. According to multiple reports from the time, the song faced real restrictions on Jamaican radio, limiting how often, and in some cases whether, it could be played on certain stations at all. Here is something many fans never fully realized. Despite facing real trouble at home, the song became massively popular overseas, especially throughout the Caribbean diaspora community across the United Kingdom. Proving clearly that a song restricted in one place can still become deeply beloved almost everywhere else in the world. Because it never received full, consistent radio support in its own home country. Many younger reggae fans today do not even know this song exists at all, even though older, longtime fans still consider it an absolute essential classic of the entire era. A woman finally stepping out from a giant, famous shadow, only to be quietly held back by the very system that should have celebrated her success. That is a story worth remembering clearly, told fully, and never forgotten again. Number 2. Eek-A-Mouse, Do Dem. Now picture something completely unusual, almost strange the very first time you hear it. A voice that does not simply sing words, but plays with sound itself, weaving nonsense syllables between real lyrics, almost like an instrument tucked inside a human throat. Released in 1981, this song introduced a singing style unlike almost anything reggae audiences had ever heard before it. It felt playful, unpredictable, and completely original from the very first few seconds. Fans either fell in love with it instantly, or found themselves genuinely confused by what they were hearing. The song became a defining moment in early dancehall history. helping shape an entirely new vocal approach that later quietly influenced countless artists across reggae, dancehall, and beyond. Long after this specific record had left the charts, it gained a strong, loyal following throughout the UK reggae scene and became a favorite inside listening booths at specialty record shops, where curious fans would gather just to hear that strange, addictive voice one more time before deciding whether to buy the record. Here is the surprising part few people know. Some critics, and even a number of fellow musicians at the time, reportedly dismissed the entire style as gimmicky or silly, insisting it belonged more to comedy than to serious, respected music. That harsh criticism followed the artist for years afterward, even as his unusual style quietly, steadily influenced the next generation of reggae and dancehall performers who came directly after him. Because it sounded so different from the roots reggae style dominating serious music conversations at the time, this song and its unusual approach often gets left out of official reggae history entirely, even though its fingerprints remain clearly audible inside music being made today, decades later. Sometimes the most controversial thing an artist can possibly do is simply sound like nobody else who came before them. That alone can make history quietly forget you, even while your influence keeps shaping everything that comes long after.
All right, C-Trends fam, let's keep it real. We're pouring our hearts into bringing you the best celebrity news and music deep dives. What? Check it. A massive 98% of you aren't subscribed yet. Subscribing is how you can truly support us, helping us grow and create even better content. If you're vibing with what we do, take a sec to hit that subscribe button. It's free and makes a huge difference. Plus, ring that notification bell so you never miss out. Let's flip that 98% and build this C-Trends family together. Your support is everything.
Every story you see here takes hours of digging, piecing together history, and bringing forgotten moments back to life. If you'd like to support that work, you can become a channel member. It's just the cost of a cup of coffee, but it helps us keep these stories alive, and for that, we're grateful. Number 1. Peter Tosh. No nuclear war. Earlier in this video, we promised you the story that shook reggae to its very core. This is finally it. Picture an artist who had already spent his entire career refusing to stay quiet, no matter what it cost him personally. Time this song and its full album arrived in 1987, he stood as one of reggae's boldest and most fearless voices, unafraid of governments, unafraid of powerful institutions, unafraid of anyone standing in his way. The song itself confronted the terrifying, very real threat of nuclear weapons directly and without hesitation, arriving at a moment when the entire world still lived under the constant shadow of Cold War tension. It was serious, urgent, and deeply political from start to finish. Reggae music being used as an urgent warning cry aimed at the whole planet at once. The album went on to win a major international music award, one of the highest honors reggae had ever received up to that point in its history. For a moment, it felt like the absolute peak of a long, hard-fought career. It should have been pure, uncomplicated triumph. Now for the controversy we promised you earlier. Just weeks after this album's release, Peter Tosh was killed during a violent home invasion in Jamaica. Though no solid, confirmed proof of that particular theory has ever been publicly established. There are different versions of this story, and even now, decades later, not everyone fully agrees on exactly what happened that terrible night. What remains certain is this: the tragedy struck at the very peak of his career, arriving right after he had just won global recognition for a song specifically warning the world about destruction and devastation. That painful timing transformed this song from a simple protest anthem into something far heavier, a haunting final message from an artist who never lived to see how far his warning would eventually travel across the world. Because of the tragedy surrounding it, some radio stations reportedly reduced how often they played his music in the immediate aftermath, unsure exactly how to handle the emotional weight now permanently attached to it. Over time, that quiet hesitation gradually faded away. But for years afterward, this song lived more as a solemn memorial than as a simple hit single people could enjoy, without thinking of what came after. A warning about the end of the world tragically became one man's own ending. Very few stories inside reggae history carry this much weight, and this much unresolved mystery, all wrapped together inside a single song.